Imagine a morning where everything feels familiar, until it doesn't. You walk into your usual cafe, order your regular coffee, and the barista quietly says, "The price has changed. Yesterday it was 60 rupees, today it's 120. Tomorrow it'll be 200. You laugh awkwardly, thinking it's a joke, but the seriousness on their face tells a different story. You rush to the bank to withdraw cash, but the shutters are half closed. A small notice reads, "Withdrawals temporarily limited." Inside, employees whisper nervously. Outside, people stand in a line that coils around the building. Your phone buzzes. Breaking news. A nation on the other side of the world just announced it can't pay its debts. Another country is on the brink. Stock markets freeze. Currencies tremble. Governments call emergency meetings. It feels like the start of a dystopian movie, but look closely. This isn't fiction. This is the real world warming up for something far bigger. Something no one wants to discuss openly. Something quietly growing inside every economy, every bank, every household. A threat engineered not by enemies, not by terrorists, not by foreign forces, but by our own governments, institutions, and choices. A weapon with no smoke, no explosion, no sound, yet powerful enough to collapse entire nations to debt bomb. A monster built slowly over decades through borrowing, spending, printing, promising, delaying, and pretending. A monster that now sits beneath the global economy like a ticking device. Ignored, underestimated, and dangerously misunderstood. What happens when the world owes more money than it can ever repay? Why does every government avoid talking about it? And how close are we to the moment when this bomb finally explodes? To unswear that, we must go back to where it all began. To a time when debt wasn't a threat at all. When it was just a simple, fragile promise between two people. Long before nations, banks, or financial systems existed, debt was a tool of survival. A farmer borrowed seeds from a neighbor, promising to return them after harvest. A merchant borrowed coins to buy goods for a long journey. A king borrowed gold to fight a war he couldn't avoid. Debt was small, local, personal, and most importantly limited. But as humanity grew, the value of that simple promise grew with it. Cities expanded. Trade routes connected continents. Empires rose and fell. And debt began to evolve. Governments discovered they could borrow money to rebuild after wars. Businesses discovered they could borrow to expand faster. Ordinary people discovered they could borrow to buy homes, education, and dreams. Debt became a catalyst, a shortcut to progress, a bridge to the future. But bridges can collapse when overloaded. Eventually, a dangerous idea took hold. If something goes wrong, we'll just borrow more. And that single belief changed everything. Governments started borrowing to pay for things they couldn't afford. Politicians offered new schemes, subsidies, and benefits not using tax revenue, but borrowed money. Banks encouraged loans for homes, cars, weddings, and lifestyles. Corporations borrowed to expand faster than their profits allowed. People borrowed to live beyond their means. Debt became not just normal. It became expected. It became a culture, a habit, an addiction. And like every addiction, the dose kept increasing. Behind the scenes, governments used a tool most people never see. Bonds IOUs sold to investors, promising repayment with interest. Investors bought them because governments were considered safe. But the more a government borrowed, the riskier it became. The riskier it became, the higher the interest demanded. Higher interest meant more money spent on paying interest alone. So governments borrowed more to pay the interest on the old borrowing. A loop, a trap, a spiral. Debt turned from tool to ticking bomb. And when interest rates around the world stayed near zero for years, governments felt invincible. Borrowing was cheap. Debt levels exploded. But when inflation rose, central banks panicked and raised interest rates. Suddenly, the cost of debt skyrocketed. Countries that once managed their borrowing comfortably began to struggle. Interest payments doubled, tripled, even quadrupled. Nations realized they weren't borrowing to build anymore. They were borrowing to survive. But this isn't just a government problem. Look around. Households are drowning in loans, credit cards, home loans, education loans, personal loans, microloans, buy dash now dash pay dash later traps. People borrow to maintain lifestyles they can't afford. Just like governments borrow to maintain economies they can't manage. Mathematically, this cannot continue forever. History is full of warnings. Greece, 2010. A modern European country suddenly unable to repay its debt. ATMs emptied. Banks froze. People protested as the economy collapsed. Argentina, defaulting again and again. Savings evaporated. Inflation turned money into paper. Sri Lanka, 2022. Fuel shortages. Food shortages. Political collapse. Debt at the center of the disaster. Different nations, different continents. Same story, same cliff, same fall. But the difference now is terrifying. The biggest borrowers in the world, the United States, China, Japan, the UK, Italy, are all reaching dangerous levels of debt. These are not small economies that can collapse quietly. If they fall, the world falls with them. For decades, global finance survived on the assumption that major powers could never fail. But today, the numbers tell a different story. When interest rates rise, even rich countries struggle to pay interest. Japan spends more on interest than on most public services. The US borrows trillions every year just to avoid default. China's local governments are drowning in hidden debt. The bomb isn't in one country anymore. It is everywhere. And the world economy is so interconnected that the failure of one nation can spread like wildfire. A default here triggers panic there. A panic there freezes trade elsewhere. A freeze elsewhere brings down industries globally. Factories stop. Jobs disappear. Currencies crash. Imports vanish. Banks collapse. It's not dominoes falling in a line. It's a spiderweb where one tear shakes the entire structure. And when the debt bomb explodes, its consequences ripple into everyday life. Inflation becomes uncontrollable. Groceries rise every week. Fuel becomes a luxury. Rent climbs out of reach. Savings melt like ice in the sun. Governments cut budgets. Hospitals suffer. Schools struggle. Infrastructure decays. Public anger rises. Taxes increase. Loans become impossible to afford. Businesses shut down. Unemployment spreads. Mortgages default. People lose homes. Generations suffer for decisions made long before they were born. But the most dangerous damage isn't financial. It's psychological. Trust collapses. When people lose faith in money, the economy dies. When they lose faith in leaders, nations when they lose faith in the future, society fractures. A debt crisis is never just numbers on a screen. It is a crisis of hope, a crisis of stability, a crisis of identity. So where does all of this lead us? Every debt crisis in history ends the same way. Someone pays. There is no miracle solution. No magic wand, no painless exit. Either inflation pays it, or higher taxes pay it, or spending cuts pay it, or a currency collapse pays it, or years of slow, painful stagnation pay it. Debt doesn't disappear. It simply chooses who suffers. But debt itself isn't the villain. It is a tool, one that can build nations or destroy them. The real threat is misuse. Borrowing not for development, but for delay. Not for growth, but for convenience. Not for progress, but for politics. We've built a world addicted to the illusion that borrowing is harmless, that growth can be manufactured, that consequences can be postponed, that someone else will deal with the fallout. But the future always arrives. The bill always comes, and the bomb always explodes. The only real question left is this: can we defuse the debt bomb before it blows? Or are we already living in the explosion? What do you think? Will governments ever stop borrowing? Or is the debt bomb already unstoppable?